The Second World War was not just fought on the beaches of Normandy or in the skies above Berlin. It was also fought in silence, in codes whispered through static radios, in messages hidden in the seams of clothing, and in the quiet deaths of men and women who never wore uniforms, yet carried the weight of a nation's survival on their shoulders. The public saw tanks, bombers, and battleships, but the true war, the secret war, took place far from the headlines. A war without medals, without honor parades, without witnesses. And it began in the most unlikely of places, a small, unmarked building in the heart of London. It was 1941. The Blitz was tearing the city apart. Every night the sky glowed orange with fire as German bombers reduced entire blocks to rubble. Yet beneath the chaos, a new kind of weapon was being forged, one that relied not on brute strength, but on deception, stealth, and cunning. Inside a quiet workshop on Baker Street, a handful of engineers and scientists toiled under flickering lamps. They weren't soldiers. They even weren't supposed to exist. Their mission came from the top-secret Special Operations Executive, Churchill's Shadow Army, ordered to set Europe ablaze. This small division, officially called MI9, was tasked with something extraordinary: to design the tools of espionage and survival for agents sent deep behind enemy lines. To the men who worked there, the workshop earned a fitting nickname: the Toyshop. But these were no ordinary toys. Every invention was born from desperation and imagination: a pipe that could fire a billet, a matchbox that concealed a miniature radio transmitter, a fountain pen that doubled as a silent dart gun, even a lump of coal that could explode when tossed into a locomotive's firebox. To the untrained eye, these were harmless household objects, but in the hands of a spy, they were instruments of chaos. And behind each gadget lay months of sleepless nights, failed experiments, and the ever-present fear of exposure. Because if the toy shop's existence was ever revealed, if a single device was traced back to London, entire networks of agents could vanish overnight. So the work was done in absolute secrecy. Blueprints were destroyed after use, tools were hidden inside fake walls, and every man who entered the toy shop knew he could never speak of what he had seen. The toy shop's masterminds were an odd group: part inventors, part magicians, part mad scientists. Their leader, Charles Fraser Smith, was a soft-spoken man with an unassuming appearance. But his mind was a labyrinth of ideas. He could turn the most ordinary object into a weapon, a disguise, or a miracle of engineering. It's said that Ian Fleming, who later created James Bond, based his famous character Q on Fraser Smith himself. But for Fraser Smith and his team, this was no fantasy. Their inventions would be carried by real agents, men and women parachuted into occupied France, Holland, and Norway. Agents who risked everything to sabotage convoys behind enemy lines, rescue prisoners of war, and gather intelligence from the heart of the Reich. And these agents had no safety net. If captured, there would be no rescue, no negotiation, no name. Only silence. Because spies in wartime were ghosts, unrecognized, unrecorded, and often unburied. As the months passed, the toy shop's creations grew bolder. Miniature cameras were hidden in cigarette lighters. Maps were printed on silk, folded and sewn into clothing linings. Razor blades carried microfilm. Even playing cards peeled open to reveal escape routes out of Nazi territory. The line between creativity and insanity blurred. Each tool was a balance between genius and madness, between survival and suicide. And yet these silent weapons changed the course of history, because every bridge that exploded behind enemy lines, every convoy that mysteriously vanished, every coded message that reached London safely could be traced back to this unassuming little workshop, the toy shop, where the war in the shadows truly began. In the Great War of Nations, Guns may have won battles, but here, in the shadows of London, minds were the weapons that would decide the fate of the world.
While the battlefront raged across Europe, another kind of war took shape. One waged not with bullets and bombs, but with gadgets so ingenious that they seemed almost unreal. The toy shop's engineers became the hidden architects of deception. Their creations blurred the line between science and sorcery, between survival and suicide. And in the hands of Allied spies, these inventions became the thin line between life and death. Inside those brick walls on Baker Street, every object had potential. A compass hidden inside a button, a radio disguised as a loaf of bread, a watch that could ignite a fuse. To the unknowing eye, it was junk. To a spy, it was salvation. Every tool was designed with one goal: to help an agent operate, sabotage, or escape without ever being suspected. And the stakes were terrifyingly high. One careless detail, one misaligned wire, and an entire resistance network could collapse overnight. The toy shop's earliest masterpieces was the escape kit, a small, discreet package disguised as an innocent personal item: shaving cream, a tin of biscuits, even a bar of soap. Inside, one might find a tiny compass, a silk map printed with escape routes, and a file to cut through barbed wire. It was the kind of kit you'd only use once, and only if you'd already lost everything. Then there was the explosive rat, a grotesque yet brilliant creation. Engineers stuffed real dead rats with plastic explosives and sealed them to look natural. These were meant to be tossed into the coal piles used to feed German locomotives. When shoveled into a firebox, the rat would detonate, destroying the engine and sending the train and all its supplies into oblivion. The idea was so shocking that when German intelligence discovered a shipment of them, they launched a continent-wide hunt for more, wasting valuable time and resources. The toy shop's mission had succeeded, not in destruction, but in distraction. There was also the time pencil, a device so simple yet so deadly that it redefined sabotage. It looked like an ordinary pencil, but inside lay a small glass vial filled with acid. Once activated, the acid slowly ate through a thin wire holding back a spring-loaded detonator. The delay could be timed from minutes to hours, depending on the mission. A perfect tool for agents who needed to plant explosives and vanish before anyone knew what happened. But not all inventions were meant to kill. Many were designed to protect, to deceive, to help agents survive behind enemy lines. For pilots shot down over occupied territory, Mi-9 developed the escape suit. To the Germans, it looked like an ordinary flight uniform. But stitched into its seams were silk maps, gold sovereigns, and miniature compasses. Even the buttons could unscrew to reveal tiny blades or hollow compartments for microfilm. When captured pilots were sent to POW camps, escape became a new kind of warfare. The toy shop found ways to smuggle tools into prisons, hidden inside Monopoly boards, chess sets, and even packs of cigarettes. A prisoner opening a Monopoly game might find a real compass under the go-to-jail square, a folded silk map under the board, and local currency tucked inside the fake money. It sounds absurd, but hundreds of Allied soldiers escaped Nazi captivity thanks to these games. Then came the sleeve gun, a weapon for agents who couldn't afford to be seen armed. It was a single-shot 22 caliber pistol, compact enough to slide under a jacket sleeve. A quick flick of the wrist, and it could fire silently at point-blank range. It was crude, unreliable, and dangerous to handle. But to a spy with no backup, it was the last hope when all else failed. The toy shop's most ambitious work, however, came in the form of miniature radios. At a time when the average field radio was larger than a suitcase, these engineers created transmitters small enough to hide in everyday objects, lamps, books, even fake logs. One of their proudest achievements was the biscuit tin radio. Built into an actual tin of cookies, it allowed field agents to communicate with London from behind enemy lines. In the static-filled nights of occupied France, a single message sent through one of those biscuit tins could turn the tide of a battle. Every invention carried fingerprints of genius and tragedy. Because for each gadget that saved an agent, another failed in the field. A radio signal detected too soon, a fuse that misfired, a weapon that jammed in the rain. And when that happened, no one came to help. The agents disappeared, swallowed by the night and the Gestapo's silence. Still, the toy shop never stopped creating. Their designs were shared with the American OSS, the forerunner to the CIA, who expanded them into their own laboratories. Together, they pioneered the modern art of espionage, the science of deception that would later define the Cold War. But within the walls of London's toy shop, innovation was more than duty. It was obsession. Each new mission demanded a new invention. Each captured spy drove them to build something better, faster, smarter. It was a cycle of brilliance and grief, creation born from the ashes of sacrifice. The toy shop had no banners, no glory, no recognition. Its walls were lined not with medals, but with discarded prototypes, silent witnesses to a hidden war. Yet those who worked there understood their role in history. They weren't building toys. They were crafting miracles. Each device a lifeline to men and women who stood alone in enemy territory, fighting not for fame, but for a chance to make it home. And while the rest of the world counted victories in miles gained or cities taken, the toy shop measured theirs in whispers. A bridge collapsed, a convoy lost, a coded message safely received. For them, victory wasn't a flag in the rubble. It was a pulse on the radio, a faint signal across the airwaves that told them someone, somewhere, was still alive.
By 1942, the toy shop's creations were no longer experiments, they were in the field. From the cobblestone streets of occupied Paris to the frozen forests of Norway, men and women carried these weapons of ingenuity into the shadows of Europe. Their mission was simple in theory: gather intelligence, disrupt enemy lines, and stay alive. In practice, it was hell. The War of Spies was a world of silence. No medals, no uniforms, no second chances. Every coded message sent, every train derailed, every whisper passed through a barbed wire fence, it all depended on the work born in that unmarked London lab. Among the first to use toy shop equipment was Vera Atkins, one of the most formidable officers of Britain's Special Operations Executive. She oversaw hundreds of agents sent into occupied France, ordinary men and women transformed into ghosts. They carried silk maps folded into their collars, cyanide pills hidden in pens, and miniature radios disguised as books. Each one knew the odds. If caught, they would face torture, interrogation, and execution. But still, they went. One of them was Violet Chabot. At just 23, she was a courier for the resistance, armed with a Sten gun, a code book, and a steel will. She used Toyshop gadgets to sabotage German convoys and relay vital messages to London. In June 1944, during a firefight in Normandy, she fought until her ammunition ran dry. Captured, tortured, and eventually executed at Ravensbrück, her courage became legend. The Toyshop engineers never knew her name, but their creations had been in her hands. They built the tools. She gave them purpose. Then there was Noor Inayat Khan, a wireless operator trained by the SOE. She carried one of the Toyshop's smallest radios, the biscuit tin transmitter, deep into Nazi-occupied Paris. For months, she evaded the Gestapo, constantly moving, never sleeping in the same place twice. She transmitted coded messages that coordinated drops, escapes, and sabotage missions across France. Each time she keyed her transmitter, she risked detection. German direction-finding vans prowled the streets, tracking radio signals. A few seconds too long on air, and they would triangulate her location. Still she stayed. Still she transmitted. Until one night, surrounded by German agents, she was taken. Her final words were defiance. Her radio, dismantled on a Gestapo table, was one of the Toyshop's finest. The war of machines and metal had turned into a war of whispers and wires. The Toyshop's radios became the arteries of the resistance, fragile, vital, invisible. They carried not just data, but hope. In Norway, a small team of commandos landed under the cover of snow. Their mission: destroy the heavy water plant at Vermach, a facility critical to Germany's atomic program. Armed with time pencils and explosive charges from the Toyshop, they crept through the mountains. Every footstep could have been their last. When dawn broke, the factory was a crater. Germany's dream of a nuclear weapon was shattered not by tanks, but by a handful of men carrying British ingenuity in their packs. In France, resistance fighters used the Toyshop's magnetic limpet mines to sink German supply barges in the Seine. The mines were designed to cling silently beneath the waterline, detonating hours later. To an onlooker, the river flowed peacefully, until suddenly, a column of smoke and flame erupted from its surface. Each explosion was a message: you are not safe, we are still here. The Toyshop's influence reached even further, into Italy, where agents disguised themselves as priests and merchants, smuggling radios and sabotage tools through checkpoints. Their weapons weren't guns, but cigarettes, hollowed out to carry rolled-up microfilm containing German troop movements. In a war obsessed with firepower, information had become the deadliest weapon of all. And in Germany itself, brave souls within the resistance used Toyshop tools to strike from within. Forged papers, invisible inks, hidden compartments in walking sticks, every detail crafted with obsessive precision. The Toyshop's work was not glamorous, it was meticulous. Every screw mattered, every spring, every wire. Because one mistake didn't just mean failure for the person using it, it meant execution for the person using it. But among the most haunting stories came from the field operators, the men who carried Toyshop weapons into the unknown. They lived double lives, surrounded by enemies, trusting their gadgets more than their own memories. A man might walk into a cafe, order coffee, and quietly twist a ring on his finger, activating a tiny cyanide capsule hidden inside. He'd do it not to kill, but to ensure silence if captured. That was the cost of the Spies' war. And yet, amid the horror, there were moments of brilliance. Pure, cinematic acts of defiance. Like the night a young agent used a Toyshop-designed radio to lure a German convoy into an ambush. The signal he sent was simple, coded as a supply request. The Germans took the bait. Moments later, resistance fighters armed with Toyshop explosives struck from the trees. The road erupted in flame, and by dawn, the invaders were gone. The locals called it the night the ghosts came. For every story of victory, there were dozens of losses. Agents betrayed, captured, executed in silence. But even in failure, their missions bled value, because every captured device forced the enemy to waste time, to question, to doubt. The toy shop's genius wasn't just in what it built, it was in what it made the enemy fear. To the Germans, it was as if Britain's spies were everywhere. Every book, every radio, every pen could be a weapon. Paranoia spread faster than bullets. Commanders ordered constant inspections, soldiers lived in suspicion, and entire intelligence networks strained under the pressure of uncertainty. That was psychological warfare at its purest, and it was orchestrated by men who never left London. As the war dragged on, the toy shop's work evolved. They created weapons that didn't just kill, they humiliated, disoriented, or distracted. Explosive coal, cameras in cigarette cases, booby-trapped briefcases that could level an entire building. Each invention felt more impossible than the last, yet each one found its way into enemy territory. The world outside never saw these tools. They weren't displayed in museums or paraded in victory marches. They were buried with the agents who used them, left behind in ruins, locked away in Gestapo evidence rooms, or lost to history. But their legacy lived on in the silence they left behind. Because every time a bridge collapsed, every time a train derailed, every time a radio message pierced the night, somewhere, in a dark London workshop, the toy shop's lamps burned a little brighter. Their engineers didn't cheer or celebrate. They simply picked up their pencils and began sketching the next design. Because the war of secrets never stopped. And in the shadows of that endless game, Britain's toy shop had become the mind behind the myth. By 1944, the guns of Europe thundered louder than ever. The Allies were pushing toward liberation. Cities, once silent under occupation, were alive with hope, and Hitler's empire was cracking at the edges. But beneath that noise, another kind of war raged, one that no army could see. A war of messages, sabotage, and deception. A war fought by the invisible. The toy shop had grown beyond imagination. What began as a small room of eccentric engineers was now a sprawling network of secret labs, warehouses, and underground test facilities scattered across Britain. The scientists worked under new names, their families believing they were civil servants or factory workers. In truth, they were designing the instruments of the most sophisticated intelligence campaign in human history. Every day, couriers arrived with strange requests from the Special Operations Executive. A way to blow up a bridge without sound. A camera that could fit in a matchbox. A transmitter that could fit inside a loaf of bread. And somehow, the toy shop always delivered. One of their crowning achievements was the Sleeping Beauty, a one-man submersible that allowed spies to approach enemy ships silently beneath the waterline. Small, sleek, and armed with limpet mines, it was piloted by a single agent who relied on nothing but darkness and oxygen. From the black water, they became phantoms, ghosts who slipped beneath Nazi harbors, attached their explosives, and vanished into the night. Entire destroyers were crippled by men who never fired a shot. Then came Operation Fortitude, the grand deception that would ensure the success of D-Day. Toy shop engineers worked hand in hand with intelligence officers to design decoy tanks, inflatable landing craft, fake radio transmissions, even dummy soldiers made of rubber. An entire phantom army was created to mislead German intelligence into believing the invasion would strike Calais, not Normandy. When the storm finally broke on June 6, 1944, the Germans had been completely fooled. The real invasion caught them off guard, and the tide of war
shifted forever. But victory came at a price. The Toyshop's devices had spread across Europe, but so had the bodies of the men and women who carried them. Agents disappeared, networks collapsed, and silence replaced their names. London's intelligence offices received telegrams in code, short, cryptic, and final. Each one represented a life lost, a mission completed, or both. But still, the work continued, because the enemy was adapting too. The Germans had their own scientific geniuses, engineers and cryptographers working to counter the Toyshop's inventions. Radio detectors became sharper. Encryption grew tighter. Their spies learned to mimic British gadgets, turning deception against its master. It became a chess game played in the shadows, every move countered, every victory temporary. In one of the most daring moments of this invisible war, a team of British agents used Toyshop forgeries to infiltrate a German communication hub in Holland. They carried fake documents, uniforms, even cigarettes stamped with false brands, perfect down to the ink. They spent 3 weeks inside enemy lines, gathering intel and sabotaging transmissions. When they finally vanished, the Gestapo was left chasing ghosts. And through it all, Fraser Smith and his team kept working, unseen, uncelebrated. They were the blacksmiths of illusion, shaping fear into function. Each new device was tested in secret, each failure buried quietly. There were no press releases, no public praise. Only quiet satisfaction when news arrived that their toys had done their job, or solemn silence when they hadn't. As Europe burned, the Toyshop also turned its mind to the future. What would come after the war? The men in those dim workshops knew something others didn't, that espionage was not temporary. It was evolution. The skills they'd honed, stealth, surveillance, psychological warfare, would not fade with peace. They would simply find new enemies. And even before the final German surrender, Britain's intelligence networks were preparing for a different kind of conflict. Not against an army, but an ideology. The Cold War had not yet begun, but its tools were already being built. From the ashes of the Toyshop, MI6 and later the CIA would draw inspiration for their own covert programs. Tiny transmitters hidden in cufflinks, microfilm concealed in buttons, listening devices woven into walls. Every spy movie, every Cold War gadget, it all had roots in the Toyshop's war. The line between soldier and scientist had blurred forever. The battlefield had expanded, no longer defined by trenches or barbed wire, but by invisible lines of code, deception, and silence. The men and women who fought in the shadows would never see medals or glory, but their legacy became the blueprint of modern intelligence. The invisible war didn't end with victory in Europe. It simply changed uniforms. When the last bombs fell and the treaties were signed, the Toyshop's engineers didn't return to ordinary life. Many were quietly absorbed into new organizations, some building rockets, others creating surveillance devices for the early Cold War. A few simply vanished, their records sealed under layers of classified ink. But for those who survived, one truth remained. They had seen the future of warfare, and it was invisible. Even as peace returned to the streets of London, the Toyshop remained active under new names and new projects. Its laboratories became foundations for MI6's technical branches. Its ideas inspired entire divisions within the newly formed American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which would later evolve into the CIA. In the late 1940s, A small group of former Toyshop engineers gathered for a quiet dinner in a London club. No medals, no cameras, just a few aging men raising glasses to the ghosts they'd armed with their inventions. One of them reportedly said, "We fought the war no one will ever believe existed." And in a way, he was right. Because the Toyshop's greatest creation was not a gun, a bomb, or a radio. It was the idea that victory could be won through illusion. Their legacy lived on, not in museums, but in every whisper between spies, in every secret file stamped classified, and in every innovation that turned information into a weapon. The Toyshop's war had ended, but its shadow still stretched across history. Even today, the echoes of that invisible war remain. Every time a drone flies unseen, a message is encrypted, or a government moves pieces in silence, the spirit of the Toyshop watches from the dark. Because the tools of deception never die. They simply evolve. And the ghosts who built them still whisper through the gears of modern espionage. Quiet, unseen, and eternal. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in 1945, the world exhaled. Cities smoldered under the weight of a war that had consumed everything. But in the quiet after the storm, there were no parades for the Toyshop. No medals for the men and women who fought their battles in the shadows. Their work was erased by design, classified, sealed, forgotten. London rebuilt itself above a layer of invisible history. The workshops on Baker Street were emptied, their benches cleared, their blueprints burned. What remained were memories and ghosts. Because the war had not just reshaped maps and borders, it had reshaped minds. Those who once built weapons of illusion struggled to return to ordinary life. After years of secrecy, of deception and double meaning, how could they ever live honestly again? They'd learned that truth itself was a tool, one to be sharpened, hidden, and used only when necessary. The Toyshop had not just changed warfare, it had changed the people who waged it. Fraser Smith, the quiet man behind so many inventions, never sought fame. He continued to work for the government in silence, his name unknown outside of a handful of intelligence officers. Only years later would the world learn who he truly was. The man who inspired Ian Fleming's Q. The genius who armed the spies that helped turn the tide of war. And yet, Fraser Smith never saw himself as a hero. When asked about his creations, he once said, "We simply made what needed to exist." But those creations did more than serve a need. They bridged the impossible, turning imagination into weaponry, transforming simple objects into instruments of liberation. A fountain pen became a dagger. A radio became a lifeline. A playing card became a map to freedom. Each tool carried not just ingenuity, but the hope of an entire nation, the belief that even in darkness, human creativity could be a form of resistance. Across Europe, fragments of the Toyshop's work still linger. A rusted limpet mine recovered from a Norwegian fjord. A silk map discovered in the lining of a soldier's jacket. A broken radio buried under the floorboards of a French farmhouse. Each artifact is a whisper from the past. A reminder that victory was not only forged by armies, but by hands that built in secret. The agents who used those inventions, many never returned. Their names remained carved only on quiet memorials, their faces lost to time. But for every life they lived in silence, the world they protected found its voice again. Their courage was measured not in medals, but in moments. the press of a hidden button, the flick of a matchbox, the sending of a final coded word before capture. Decades later, as historians unearth their stories, the toy shop has become a legend, a blend of myth and truth, shadow and light. Its existence proves something profound, that even in humanity's darkest hour, creativity was not destroyed, it adapted. That the mind can be just as powerful as the machine, and that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is an idea no one believes possible. The Cold War would soon rise, carrying the toy shop's legacy into a new era. New gadgets, new enemies, new lies, but the same invisible war. The seeds planted in those secret London rooms grew into the foundation of modern intelligence. Every listening device, every coded transmission, every digital spy satellite, all trace their lineage back to a handful of men working by candlelight, crafting miracles out of brass and wire. Today, when we watch the stories of Bond or read about covert operations and cyber wars, we are seeing echoes of the toy shop's mind at work, reimagined for new battlefields. Its spirit lives in every invention that hides complexity beneath simplicity, every operation that turns the ordinary into the extraordinary. But perhaps its greatest legacy is not in the gadgets or the victories, but in what it revealed about human nature. That courage is not only found on the front line, that genius can bloom even under the shadow of death, and that the will to resist, to fight tyranny with intellect and imagination, is as powerful as any weapon ever built. So the next time you see an image of World War II, the tanks, the planes, the soldiers marching across Europe, remember this: there was another war, one fought in silence, a war of minds, fought by dreamers, engineers, and spies who shaped the world from behind closed doors. They were the invisible warriors, and the toy shop was their forge. Though their names have faded, their work endures. In every coded message, every hidden device, every whisper that passes between nations, even today. The tools have changed, the faces have changed, but the shadows remain. And somewhere deep in the archives of forgotten history, the blueprints of the toy shop still sleep, waiting for the next war that will need them.